Somehow, this case here is the case that every website is telling you to buy. It seems to show up as one of the top results no matter where you shop. And on Amazon, it's the #1 computer case. Though it looks like the NZXT H5 Flow is another option you see floating around, so maybe I'll have to check that one out in the future and see how it compares to this. But back to this, the Corsair 4000D Airflow. Coming in at anywhere between £75 to £85 depending on where you shop, this case surely has it all. Plenty of fans? Nope. Well, at least good stock fans? Nope. RGB or cool RGB accents? Nope. If you want all of that, you'll want to look at the iQOO 4000D RGB Airflow, though that's nearly double the price at £150 and doesn't even include an exhaust fan.
Really?
So realistically, you'd want to look at maybe adding some of your own RGB fans to the standard version like we have here. So when you look at the spec sheet or the pictures online, we're not really off to a great start. This is exactly what I thought before I purchased this case. But when it arrived, I opened it up and things changed. This feels like a premium case that has had some expensive extras removed as opposed to a cheap case with a load of RGB fans added to bump up that price. After removing the case from the protective bag, you immediately notice the hints of Corsair yellow branding throughout the chassis. On top surrounding the I/O, on the lip of the dust filter, on the rear with the captive side panel thumb screws, subtly on the inside next to the motherboard, and even on the rear of the case with the screws for the SSD caddies. I think yellow is a difficult color to blend into your system, but Corsair have done a really nice subtle job here, and I'm a fan. Let's take a look at the exterior of this case. The front panel is a sturdy piece of steel that's full of triangle shaped holes to allow air to pass through, and it just pops into the plastic surround at the front of the case in each corner of the frame. Underneath that is a super easy to remove magnetic dust filter. If you have pets, you'll appreciate how easy to access and clean this really is. We have another dust filter on the bottom of the case as well for the power supply, which slides in and out from the rear, and of course that one on top we mentioned earlier, which is also magnetic and has that subtle yellow tab. One thing I do like about this top dust filter is that even though we've got a radiator mounted up top, you can't see the screws digging into it or denting the filter. If you look closely, you can also see the little triangle pattern here too. Though it's not very fine at all and does actually affect the temperatures in a negative way when you opt for a top mounted radiator. A little bit more on that later in the video. Staying up top, we have the I/O, which consists of a single USB 3.0 Type A port, a USB 3.1 Type C port, both of which have that little yellow accent. We also have a combined headphone and microphone jack, a reset switch, and the power button as well. Moving around the case, the side panels are held in place with 2 yellow thumb screws at the rear, and once you loosen them, you'll need to push the panel you want to remove away from the case. This can require a bit of force, but shouldn't require anything extreme. Just make sure you have one hand on the panel and another one doing the pushing on the little tabs at the rear. Then when you want to replace the panel, it simply pushes in and clicks back into place before you can tighten it at the back with those captive thumb screws I mentioned earlier. The rear side panel that covers your cables feels pretty flimsy and isn't the thickest piece of steel I've seen, but it's adequate and I won't knock any points off for that. The tempered glass, on the other hand, I'm not a big lover of. It's just too dark. Of course you could light up the inside of the case with LED strips or fans to help combat that, but I personally find not being able to see inside my system when the LEDs are off a little bit of a bummer. Even with some RGB fans in the front, it's still pretty dark. So you will likely want more than just 3, though I have to admit one thing I can appreciate is how stealthy this all looks. Having 0 RGB like we have in this system looks incredibly sleek and mature, and this sort of build wouldn't look out of place even in a work environment, let alone your home. With the Corsair 4000D being a typical mid-tower, you get the usual 7 expansion slots for GPUs, capture cards and so on, as well as 2 horizontal ones if you wish to mount your GPU here, though I'd only recommend this if you're ward schooling your GPU, as 2 slots just isn't enough for most modern GPUs, and it'd be way too close to the glass, killing any chance of the GPU taking in enough air. These expansion slots and the majority of the back of the case also feature the same triangular pattern seen on that front panel and below that top dust filter, which really helps give this case a nice sense of cohesion and a more premium look overall. But that's enough about the outside. Let's move inside the case, and taking off the glass panel reveals even more of that jet black interior, unless your model has a scuffed paint job like mine. I'm genuinely curious, is this a common thing amongst these cases, or is it just mine? Let me know if you've seen anything like this before on a case from Corsair. Anyway, inside we get a better look at where you'll be working and spending a decent chunk of your time when building your PC. There's plenty of cable cutouts at the top and the bottom for your fans and I/O cables, as well as this nice sleek cable bar on the right hand side. I'm a big fan of these, and I think they look neater than grommets and do a good job hiding the majority of the cable. But if you have cable extensions and want to show them off, or if you want to use a larger EATX motherboard, you can remove it too. At the front of the case, there's this cheap piece of plastic which doesn't seem to blend in at all with the rest of the interior. Thankfully, it pops out quite easily though to allow more room when mounting a radiator, but if you've done an okay job of cable management like I have, you could just leave it out, but I can't really work out whether it looks better or worse with it installed. Then again, not that you could even tell when the incredibly dark tempered glass panel is actually on. On the basement of the power supply, we see that familiar triangle mesh to help allow some air flow through the case a bit better and allow that heat from potential hard drives below to naturally rise up through the case. Inside, we can also get a closer look at the included fans, which are just some stock fans that Corsair sells for about $3 each on their website. Corsair fans are usually pretty expensive, so seeing a $3 fan from Corsair goes to show there's nothing special about these. Safe to say, I'm not a fan. I'm sorry. It's just so easy to use a fan joke when talking about fans. These fans that Corsair include have a maximum RPM of about 1250 and are only found in the 4000 series of cases. They're 3-pin DC fans, so control is a little bit more limiting than a PWM fan, and they barely generate enough airflow for a case of this size. Though I do have to admit they are pretty quiet at their lowest setting of around 650 RPM and not that loud at their maximum RPM. But you can get much more airflow and less noise from much better fans, which is a shame as that's an added cost you'll likely want to fork out for. Before we move around to the back, I'll quickly touch on compatibility inside the case. At the rear we have support for a 120mm fan or radiator, up top we have support for two 120 or two 140mm fans, or a 240 or 280mm radiator, though installing a 280 at the top could cause some headaches as it will make reaching any cables at the top of the motherboard absolutely impossible, as well as potentially interfering with your RAM or VRM or the housing around your motherboard's rear I/O as well. Then at the front we have support for up to three 120mm fans or two 140mm fans as well as support for up to a 280 or 360mm radiator, providing you remove that little piece of plastic at the front. Again, if you have a radiator at the top of the case already, 360mm isn't going to fit, so you will need to use something smaller at the front if you plan on using two simultaneously. As well as this, if you decide to go with a front-mounted radiator, you will be eating into your GPU space, which is a maximum length of 360mm without a radiator installed. Though if you don't care about radiators anyway and want to mount a simple air cooler on your CPU, you'll be happy to know that you can fit towers up to 170mm in height. Now it's time for everybody's favourite part, the cable management section. And the rear of the 4000D is simple yet effective. You have your main run of cables held together with just 3 Velcro straps in an easy to follow channel. There's actually enough room here for you to install your chunky ATX cable as well as all of the front I/O cables, which is good. Then they can easily shoot off of the channel and wrap around the front of the case rather neatly thanks to the cable bar covering a lot of the excess or untidiness. Along the top of the case, there's multiple cutouts across the top of the motherboard for all of your most common locations. Running fans or RGB cables can be done neatly, and the EPS connectors for the CPU comfortably fit through their allotted hole. They also easily run around the edge of the case, and a couple cable ties are all that's needed to keep them from flapping in the way. There's cable tie points pretty much everywhere around the back of this case, other than a large cutout for the motherboard, which is a nice addition as it can make changing your CPU cooler that much easier if you need to, and not have to remove your motherboard. You also have removable 2.5-inch bays for SSDs or RGB hubs that easily attach with a nice yellow thumb screw. If you wanted, you could also move these around the front of the case if you really want to show off your SATA SSDs. The hard drive bay down the bottom is also easily removed with just 2 thumb screws, though the screws for the hard drive bay were over tightened from the factory, so I had to use some pliers to loosen them up a bit. As a result of this, you can actually fit up to 220mm power supplies in this case without any worries. So here's some building advice for you. So far it all sounds lovely, like a case made in heaven. But when it comes to building inside of the 4000D, I've got a few things I'd like to point out. Accessories and screws all come in a nice little box and are individually wrapped so you can't mix them up, though they're not labelled. There's some extra Velcro ties included as well, though I personally found no need for them. When installing the motherboard, I appreciated the little nubbin that helps to guide you into place and make lining up the screw holes that much easier. Installing the GPU is simple, only requiring thumb screws, but the screws are kind of big and they conflict a little bit with the graphics card, so you'll likely have to take out an extra row, install your GPU, and then put them back in. When you are doing your build, make sure that you plug in everything at the top of the case. Everything. Before you mount the radiator up top. If you don't, installing the 8-pin or 8+4 pin for the CPU, or any cables at the top, will be an absolute nightmare, though fortunately you can see through the top of the case, which makes lining things up a little bit easier if you forget to. But I'd recommend plugging in the CPU fan cable or RGB before mounting the radiator, even if it seems a little bit fiddly at first. Now finally we get onto the temperature testing, and this time it's a bit of a difficult one. I've got a new setup in this case with a Ryzen 5 7600X and a B650 Aorus Elite AX motherboard, so that usually means one thing: the CPU will do its very best to hit 95 degrees and stay there. I personally don't think this very useful, as we'd end up with the same temperatures regardless of the load, so I undervolted the 7600X, setting a power and thermal limit while seeing very little performance dip. This means the CPU temperature will actually fluctuate based on the cooling it has available, which is what we want to use when testing cases. The GPU is also undervolted, but that's just for consistency and reducing power consumption. If you'd like to see a video about undervolting in the future and why I do this, feel free to leave a comment down below. Now, let's talk about temperatures. In the default state, with just the two fans, under a combined load of MSI Combustor GPU benchmark and the CPU burner, the CPU tops out at 79.5 degrees, while the GPU hits 62.3 degrees. Honestly, this isn't too bad, especially that GPU temperature. It's on par with the Fantex P200A I tested a couple weeks ago, when that case had 5 fans installed. One thing I did notice while testing though, is that it felt like hardly any heat was escaping out of the top of the case through that dust filter. Taking it off actually reduced the CPU temperatures by about 1.5 degrees and the GPU by about 1 degree also. It's not game changing, but I thought it was definitely worth noting, considering how easy it is to just drop your temperatures if you want them to be that little bit lower. Originally, I didn't plan on adding any additional fans to see what difference it made because, well, I'm kind of lazy. But it was a thought that was just sat in the back of my head and I had to find out. So swapping out the cheap $3 fan for these 3 Deepcool FC120 fans saw a good drop in temperatures. I also tried it with and without that dust filter on top to see if it made a difference. So overall, adding 3 extra fans will reduce the stock CPU temperature in this configuration by just over 3 degrees Celsius, and you can drop that a little bit more to 75.8 if you omit the dust filter when mounting a radiator up top. GPU temperatures are generally fine throughout though, but we did manage to shave nearly 2 degrees off in total by adding extra fans and removing the dust filter. Before we wrap things up though, I'll give you guys a quick noise test with the CPU and GPU fans at idle, so you can hear how the included fans actually sound. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of today's video, and I have to admit, I get it. I understand why so many people buy this case. My complaints are all so minor, and if you're the type of person that doesn't care for cases that include fans and you want to use your own fans anyway, then I get it. I kind of wish they didn't include any fans that made the case about $5 cheaper, then that'd encourage people to pick up some extra fans anyway and truly populate this thing and get the most out of it. I would happily recommend picking up some of these daisy chaining Deepcool FC120 fans that I checked out last week as some great affordable fans to populate the front of this case, reduce those maximum temperatures, and really make it shine. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of the video. What do you guys think? Is this case likely to be the home of your next PC build? Or if you'd like me to check out any other good PC cases, let me know down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like, and if my face hasn't offended you, don't forget to get subscribed if you want to see more videos from me in the future. If you're interested in checking out any of the products I used in this video, including the Corsair 4000D, make sure you check the description down below to catch my Amazon affiliate links. Thank you very much for watching guys, I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.